Are breweries or distributors paying to have certain brands sold in bars and package stores while others are shut out?
The answer is yes. Hi, my name is Frank, and this is Beer Esquire. Today we're going to be looking at pay-to-play. The current interest in pay-to-play began precisely at 12:53 a.m., October 14, 2014. That's when Dan Paquette, the brewer of Pretty Things, a Boston area brewery, started tweeting. Can anyone guess why we're not served at Bukowski's Tavern or Lower Depths and any other restaurants from that group? Correct. We don't illegally buy lines. The two establishments that he named were part of a group of restaurants that also included other well-regarded places like the Tip Tap Room. The owner of these establishments was not amused, and the very next day issued an open letter full of typos and bluster. "I have decided never to serve your product," he wrote. "Not only will I not sell your product because it is both inferior for the price, it is unfortunate that you would lump our small business into the pay-to-play category." But the letter was a curious artifact, too, because it didn't really deny the practice. In fact, it said, though common, the practice of giving away kegs and other gifts to move product may be common with other companies. I am forced to question your own practices. And this whole thing probably would have just blown over. It's come up periodically. There's been exposés on pay-to-play in other places and other times, and nothing really happened of it. But what happened here is the Boston Globe, and reporter Dan Adams in particular, started regularly publishing on this phenomenon. Massachusetts Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission started investigating almost immediately. A lot of folks initially said that Dan Paquette had been irresponsible, but Dan had the goods. Just 2 days later, when the state investigators spoke to him, he gave them invoices. They'd been forwarded from his distributor, and it showed that a company related to the Wilcox Group was billing him for, quote, marketing support and, quote, menu programming. And when the state spoke to his distributor, Craft Beer Guild, and asked them what it was about, they initially lied. They said, okay, it's for printing menus. Wait, do you guys actually print menus? No. So it turns out that Gordon Wilcox was being paid for tap lines. In fact, he was being paid $1,000 a line to lock down 20 lines. That's $20,000 a year. And the commission made findings about 5 other restaurant chains, and each of them had been paid for access. Some of them were paid in the form of $1,000 to $2,000 per year per line, and others were paid in the form of sort of rebates or kickbacks, $20 per keg. Altogether, the commission found evidence of $120,000 worth of kickbacks that were actually invoiced and written in checks. And so the commission decided to suspend the license of the distributor, Craft Brewers Guild, for 3 months. And for context, this was the largest independent distributor in the state. They had lots of huge accounts like Sierra Nevada and Allagash. Since the suspension would be catastrophic to their business permanently, Craft Brewers Guild elected to instead pay a fine. The fine equals 50% of the profits over the period of the suspension, and in this case that equaled $2.6 million, which was by far the largest fine that had ever been paid to the commission. Craft Brewers Guild appealed to one of the superior courts in Massachusetts, which affirmed the fine. The main issue that they had on their appeal is that the regulations were put into place on a law that had been repealed in 1970. The Superior Court, though, found that it could be justified on another provision of Massachusetts law, which is no price discrimination. It's expressly forbidden to have any kind of price discrimination on alcohol in Massachusetts, not even happy hours. Happy hours are illegal in the state, famously. Craft Brewers Guild is appealing the Superior Court's decision, and if successful, that would temporarily at least knock out the regulations preventing pay-for-play in Massachusetts. Presumably, the ABCC would draft new ones quickly. But pay-to-play isn't just a matter of state law. The Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB, has long had issue with any kind of paying for access. And so these are also illegal by federal law. And for this reason, Craft Brewers Guild was also fined $750,000 by the federal government. And a lot of people jumped in to defend Craft Brewers Guild, saying that the big boys, the duopolists, the Miller Coors and the Anheuser's, that they do even more blatant pay. But as it turns out, Massachusetts hasn't exactly found that yet. Now, the Massachusetts Commission did find that Anheuser paid almost $1 million worth of stuff to bars and to retailers, but it wasn't as blatant. It wasn't actual checks and actual invoices for tap handles. Instead, Anheuser provided things like draft towers with their branding on it to a bunch of bars, and they provided hundreds and hundreds of coolers with giant, Budweiser logos splashed over them. And Anheuser has represented that this is just ordinary promotional stuff. It's like coasters, it's like koozies. And they said to the commission, there's a matter of fundamental fairness here. It's not right that Anheuser-Busch can engage in standard, routine business activities only to have a retrospective, late determination that this regulation prohibits that activity. The commission hasn't decided anything about Anheuser, but pay-to-play has made waves across the country. In 2016, the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board issued a $150,000 fine to an Anheuser distributor who had tied up all the lines at 2 music venues. In New York, the Boston Globe's reporting uncovered a transcript deposition from 2011 which revealed that pay-to-play was a big deal at Union Beer Distributors, which is owned by the same company that owns Craft Brewers Guild in Massachusetts, the Sheehan family. The Sheehan family controls distributors in 13 states, and the deposition transcripts revealed that it was common for them to buy all sorts of tap equipment for bars, to clean their taps, to swipe credit cards at the bar in exchange for tap placement, to pay bar employees to go on charity events, to give them gifts that were worth up to $15,000, and otherwise give credits for buying kegs to bars. And so the New York State Liquor Authority has also been looking into pay-for-play more seriously, and they fined Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits of Miami $3.5 million, saying it was some of the most brazen pay-for-play that they'd ever seen. Card swipes, all of this same behavior. Meanwhile, New Jersey fined a third Sheehan family subsidiary, the Hunterding Brewing Company, $2 million for pay-to-play in that state. But the most exciting development is that the TTB was given a $5 million budget in order to enforce trade practices. And the TTB had hardly done any trade practices investigations for decades. But in just 2 months, they announced that they would be investigating Miami and Chicago. And this could be very interesting because while pay-to-play might exist in some diluted form all across the country, it definitely seems to be worse in some areas. And we know that because brewers comment on it. Greg Koch said that he moved Stone Brewing into Illinois relatively late because of how corrupt that market was supposed to be. He had started distributing in Boston before then, for example. Meanwhile, Deb Carey, who co-owns New Glarus in Wisconsin, she once distributed in Chicago, which I honestly did not know before investigating this. And she told Crane's Chicago Business in 2010 that her brewery pulled out of Chicago because it's a whore's market for beer. Small brewers can't afford to pay for play. So if you're skeptical and think that maybe only Anheuser and the Sheehan family thing engage in pay-to-play, realize that Sheehan family is not in Chicago. So the reality is that for parts of the country at least, distributors do pay for access. They pay for access in bars. And if they don't pay, their beers don't get on tap. And that probably sounds terrible, but actually it's kind of a nuanced question. There isn't really an economic difference between giving somebody a discount on kegs and giving them $1,000 to have a line. We don't normally think that mere discounts are that bad, and it hasn't been per se illegal as a matter of antitrust law for a long time, like since the time of Prohibition, when all of these rules were set in place. But whether pay-to-play is actually bad, and whether we can ever truly get rid of it, these are subjects for a future video. If you liked this video, please subscribe, and I'll see you later. Thank you.